Okay, I'd like to call the Budget Review Committee to order. It's June 10th, 2021. And we're doing this via teleconference, probably for the last time.
Oh, give them the start time.
What?
You gotta say the start time.
We started at 7:01 p.m. As chairman of the Budget Review Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12 pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone, with additional access possibilities by video or other electronic means. To access Zoom, please refer to the agenda or the city's website for the meeting link. To join by phone, dial 1-929-205-6099. Meeting ID is 822-4855-0746, and the passcode is 379695. The public may also view the meeting via Channel 16. We previously gave notice to the public of the necessary information for accessing the meeting through public postings. Instructions have also been provided for the City of Nashville's website and publicly noticed at City Hall and the Nashville Public Library. If anyone has a problem accessing the meeting via phone or Channel 16, please call 603-589-3329 and they will help you connect. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting in the methods I just mentioned, the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during the meeting, which is required under the Right to Know law. Alderman O'Brien, would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman at Large, Shoshana Kelly. Alderman at Large, Michael O'Brien Sr. is present and in the chamber. Alderman at Large, Laurie Wilshire.
I am present and I am in the chamber.
Alderman Ernest Jetty.
I'm home alone and I can hear the proceedings.
Alderman Jan Schmidt.
I am present, alone, and I can hear everyone.
Alderman at Large, Ben Clemens. Our Chairman, Richard A. Dowd.
I am present, I am in the chamber.
Mr. Chairman, we have 5 members present. Also expected in attendance is Garth McKinney, Interim Superintendent of Schools, Daniel Donovan, Chief Operation Officer. And I see also we have Heather Raymond of the Board of Education. And I would like also to recognize Alderman Elizabeth Liu.
All right, very good. First order of business will be public comment. Is there anyone, members of the public, that would wish to speak on items on the agenda this evening? Seeing and hearing no one, we'll go to communications.
There are none.
Unfinished business.
There is none.
New business resolutions.
There are none.
New business ordinances.
There are none.
Tabled in committee.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to to remove from the table the adoption of the fiscal year 2022 proposed budget for the City of Nashville General Enterprise and Special Revenue Funds. To remind the public, there will be a public hearing scheduled for June 21st, 2021 at 7 p.m. in the Nashville High School North Auditorium. And Mr. Chairman, I would like it done by roll call.
Would you please call the roll?
Alderman Schmidt.
Yes.
Alderman Jetty.
Yes.
Alderman Wilshire.
Yes.
Alderman O'Brien votes yes. Alderman Dowd.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, 5 yeas, 0 nays.
Motion carried. R21-142 is back on the table. It's real, tonight we're going to be doing Department 191, School Department. Revenue is on pages 317 to 331, and appropriations are on page 263. Who is going to start us this evening and present the budget?
Alderman Lopez has joined us.
Alderman Lopez, are you waiving for me to recognize that you're present?
Yeah, just making sure you guys know. I'm here.
Yes, I'll record you. Thank you, Alderman Lopez.
Garth, are you going to give us an overview, or Heather, who's going to start this off? Or you going to go right to Dan and?
Dr. McKinney or Mr. Donovan to start us off.
Mr. Donovan, do you want to?
I'm happy to start.
Okay.
Do you want me to share the screen, or do you have someone who could do
If
that?
you have a presentation to give, you'd have to share the screen, yes.
You go.
You're all set.
We're all set to do that.
Does this work for everybody?
Okay, and please make it full screen. Okay,
Good evening. This is the Nashua School District FY22 budget process. This is an overview that was proposed by the district leadership team. The budget development began with the district leadership team providing feedback in the budget development. Then myself and Dan finalized the budget recommendations, and then the district leadership team presented this budget to the Board of Education. Budget priorities are the following: to maintain current staffing, expand special ed staffing, continue to address out-of-district tuition, support safety and security, and establish a district budget to build on with state and federal funds. Given the pandemic and the funding that's available to us, there are a number of challenges, but there are also some opportunities. We need to put together a plan to respond to the needs of our students. We've worked to develop programs for the summer. We're working to plan back a rebound plan for next year, the 21-22 school year. Plan to develop a response to the technological challenges that we've had, the need for more staffing, the small social emotional learning needs of our kids. At the time, we're still wondering about state funding, and Dan will speak later to the latest CARES Act and ESSER funding that's available to us. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Donovan on slide 5.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so just a little Nashua at a glance are some of the numbers about our district. We have 18 schools, 12 elementary, 3 middle, 2 high schools. We have the alternative school, which will now be housed at the new Franklin Street facility come September when we're back to school. Number of students, as of 10/1/19, we had 11,025, and a year later, in 2020, we had 10,165. That's, as you can see, an 860 reduction in the number of students, which is very rare. We've done some analysis of it, and we can guarantee some of those students will come back. It will be very interesting to see what we end up with the number come 10/1/21. Total number of staff is pretty constant of 1,772 with the 71 additional that are paid for by grants. We have just a little over 1,000 teachers. The cost per student in Nashua is $13,831. That's a number that is calculated using the New Hampshire DOE report that's produced every September/October of each year. As of October of 19, we had 41% free and reduced. Due to the pandemic, We don't really know if that number has changed a whole lot because a lot of families did not fill out the required paperwork since lunches were free to all this year. The ELL students are up to 14%, and our special education students are up to 19%. Okay, this is a couple of pie charts to give you a sense of, where's the money spent in the education budget. And as you can see, labor and benefits, that's 84% of the education budget. So it's basically the cost of paying our staff and the benefits associated with that. The other amounts, utilities, transportation, the out-of-district tuition line, and outside pupil support services for our special education students, those combined are about 11.5%. So everything else, all the other costs you hear about, is really only 4.5% of the budget. Okay, just a quick summary defining the base. Our percentage is based upon the base budget, and the base budget is the budget approved by the Board of Education, which that budget does not have the benefits, the FICA and the pension in it at the time. So our budget that was approved last year by the Board of Ed was 114 million. The benefits was 41.5. So the school budget per the city, the amount you would see in the original proposed budget book was 155,853,000. So the overall budget increase that we put forward to the Board of Education and the amount that the Board of Education approved was from 114 million to 116, basically a slightly under a $2 million increase. Percentage-wise was a 1.71% increase. Then I typically break out of that 116 million, 91 million is the labor. So the increase in the labor from last year to this proposed budget is 1.4 million almost, or basically a 1.55% increase. And then the non-labor items. And the labor is about 78% of the base operating budget without benefits. And this is the other 22%, all the other costs. So the increase from last year in this proposed budget is 565,000 or 2.28%. So basically 22% of our budget's up 2.28 and 78% is up 1.5, which nets the 1.71. Okay, this budget does not have a lot of new items in it. A few of the new non-labor items we have back, if you recall, probably 7-8 years ago at this point, we added a lot of security to our schools. Put a locks on the doors, cameras, things such as that. That was about a $2 million bond at the time. So over time, these things do wear out. They need to be repaired, which we've been doing, but we figured we would start a new line in the budget, security supplies, equipment. 15,000 probably isn't enough to fully manage it, but I think we can move money in other accounts. But this was a way to set that up going forward. And the tuition out of district, we put in an extra 100,000 this year. That is a line item that for the last number of years, the operating budget hasn't had enough to fully cover the cost of out of district. Now we do have a special revenue fund available to us for if we overrun this line item and it can't be managed somewhere else within the budget. So, but we did add 100,000 this year, so we can start to get that operating budget number up to what the actual costs will be, or closer to. Okay, the additional resources sort of on the labor side that we've added. We're adding the special education department can really use another BCBA, which stands for Board Certified Behavior Analyst. Sorry. We have, I believe, 2 full-time ones. We have many more needs than just 2, so this would help get us closer to the actual number of hours required by our special education students with this skill. With the new Franklin Street building, we'll need a couple of custodians there, so that's what that is, a head custodian and another one. 3,600, relatively small number. We have head teachers for special education. We have one at Elm Street. We don't have it at the other 2 middle schools. So this will give stipends to those 2 schools for a head teacher. And the last one here is the music program stipends. We have a music program taught by many of the teachers are not our music teachers. They're people that live in the community or nearby communities, and they teach instrumental music to our students after school. They haven't had a raise or an increase in their budget in over 8 years, maybe over 10 years actually. So this is a way to increase that somewhat so that they can have some more hours and time with the children. Okay, and this is something, as probably many of you are aware, there is CARES Act funding, a significant amount of money that we've received thus far. So when we put this budget together, keep in mind that there are some needs, and especially some significant needs brought upon by COVID and remote learning, et cetera. But we do, from the federal government, have received a significant amount of money. So there's the CARES 1 Act. We have $3,274,000. We have until September of 2022 to spend that. We've allocated all those amounts. They all haven't been spent, but they all have been allocated within the grant. Then a couple months ago, we received the CARES 2. These funds are also called ESSER funds. So the CARES 2 ESSER funds, we've received $12,973,000, and we have until September 23 to spend those. We have just started putting items in there to allocate costs. We're going to be spending over the next couple of weeks a lot of time putting together an educational needs of all our students. We've received a lot of input from various members of the school community, and we'll be working to put a plan together on what we will spend that $12,973,000 on. And then just recently, CARES 3, or the ARP fund, we received another $19,299,000. That number may even go higher. We'll know more information on that over the next month or so. But just in summary, these are federal funds. They're managed and dispersed through the state. They can only be used for specific purposes. So it's not the kind of thing you can turn around and give large raises to unions or something like that. That's not the type of purpose that they're intended for. So it's a grant process. So basically the way it works is we make a request, we put it into the grant management system, we receive a yay and nay on approval, and then once that's done, we can spend the funds. And as I said before, these are one-time funds to be spent over a specific period of time. And the main item that these are supposed to be used for is to prepare, prevent, and respond to COVID-19. So when we're putting together requests, it has to be some way related to COVID-19, whether to prepare, prevent, respond. Now, there are many ways to look at that. We've had a lot of training with the state. If there's any questions from people later, we can take those. But that will be an interesting process over the next couple of years with those funds. And then this last slide is simply showing you the history of what the initial department requests have been over the last few years and what the Board of Aldermen have actually approved. So that is our presentation.
Okay. So the revenues are on page 317. Does anyone from the committee have a question on any of the revenues? Alden Wilshire?
Yes. Can you talk a little bit about school lunches and how that is going to affect us from not being able to get funding for the 21 school year?
Sure. I think what you're referring to is the state adequacy funding, the funding we get from the state?
Yeah.
Yes. So it's what it is, it's certain dollar amounts assigned to certain numbers of students. So for example, you get $3,800 or so per student in your district. You get another $1,800 or so for a free and reduced student. And there's other categories. But the whole free and reduced piece, not only as I talked earlier about the reduction in the number of students of 860, which is fairly remarkable. We've never lost that many in any one year. So we're losing funding, $3,800 per student for that, but also the free and reduced, due to the fact that in the spring, the government said there's no more, you don't have to fill out the form to get a free and reduced lunch. So it was available for all students. So therefore, a lot of parents, if they didn't have to do it, they didn't do it. We reached out, we tried to get more people to file the forms, but you know, when you don't have to do it and you still get the free lunch, our numbers went down fairly significantly in the free and reduced lunch. So therefore, that dropped the funding that came from the state too. So those two amounts, the number of students and the free and reduced lunch count that decreased, we lost in the adequacy aid calculation about $4.5 million.
Thank you.
Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Just for clarity, because of the lack of funding from the state of New Hampshire, are you saying that we could have students in jeopardy that won't receive a lunch that we've had traditionally in the past given a free lunch?
No, actually, it's free lunch. All students can get a free lunch, whether they meet the guideline or not. So, and they just decided to continue that into the next school year. So when it comes to lunches, every student can get the free lunch if they want, which has sort of wreaked havoc in our school lunch program, our special revenue fund. But as far as the students getting fed, anyone can get fed. So it's almost easier to get fed now.
So I have two questions. One, if all of a sudden we get the 860 students back, when does the funding come along with that? You have to wait till the next budget, the next year, or do they recognize that you got more students and they pony up the money?
No, you'll get it in the second half of the school year. The number is, they use an October 1st date for the number. So it takes about a month by the time it's all adjusted and reviewed by the district and the state. So they can then adjust their adequacy numbers later in the year. And so we could get some of that back. But I don't think with the free lunch again, we're gonna get much of the free and reduced lunch part of it.
I thought I had heard that they were going to ignore the issue with the forms, and the state was going to pony up that money as it was in 2019. Is that not correct?
That was a proposal, but I don't know if that passed. I'm not exactly sure what's going on up in Concord right now.
If we only knew a state rep, Alderman O'Brien?
Wasn't my committee. Alderman Schmidt? Not her committee either. Some of those things, Mr. Chairman, for your explanation, I think would be handled under the Finance Committee, because where it is funding, and not that they're close fest, but they have a lot to do to handle with the whole state budget. So we really don't get the feedback as much as some of the other particular bills.
Okay. Does anyone on the committee have any other questions relative to the revenues? All right. Appropriations are on page 263.
Mr. Chairman?
Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, I'm having trouble negotiating, separating the revenues from the appropriations. Page 317 is, in our agenda, is labeled revenues, but it's revenues and appropriations. So, could someone clarify what the difference is between the white pages and the pink pages?
Mr. Donovan, you wanna?
I don't have the pages in front of me, so
The difference is the special revenue funds in the pink pages, and there are certain things paid for under the special revenue account versus out of the general revenue. Lunches are one, as an example, because that's a federal program. That's a self-funding activity, so it's in the pink pages.
Okay,
yeah, so if the pink pages are all special revenue funds, those are revenues which are generated for you to be used for a specific purpose. So as Alderman Dowd said, any revenue generated during food service by selling lunches or money we get from the government for the lunch program, that goes back into that fund, and that's used to run that fund. Think of these special revenue funds. Another one is the driver's education. So students pay money to get their driver education certificate, and those funds are used to run the program. So the special revenue funds are like a small business, a very small business, except for the food service. Whereas the other revenues are mostly generated from the state and or federal, some of it from the students. So those funds go back to the city, and they're used to reduce the costs and therefore adjust the tax rate. The special revenue funds are all stay within the school district, and they roll over year to year.
And the cost of staffing, and especially in the lunch program, that's all covered under the funds in the special revenue account, not out of the general account. For instance, when we approve the food service contracts, that's a self-funding thing. It's not coming out of the general fund, and it's paid for by what kids pay for lunch plus federal money. So it's all in that special revenue account and not part of the general fund.
so, could I follow up?
Sure.
So, regarding, the athletic revenue fund, it shows revenues of 210,000 and appropriations of 210,000. guess that means that you spend whatever the revenue is, you spend all of that. But does that cover all of the athletic expenses? Is the athletic program self-supporting?
No, the athletic, what's in the special revenue fund? If you look at all our special revenue funds, you'll notice the way we budget them is the revenues equal the expenses. That doesn't necessarily mean that will actually occur. If, for example, the 210,000 is generated and we only spend 200, then that 10,000 would stay in, it would sort of be the profit, and that would stay in the special revenue fund and roll over the next year. But the way we've budgeted it all the time is we budget the revenues to equal the expenses. The athletic, all that's in the athletic the revenue is from two sources. It's the amount of money the students pay. We have a fee for students to play sports at the high school level, different amount per sport, and that money goes in there. And then the other revenue that they generate in that special revenue fund is from ticket sales, football, hockey, basketball, for the most part. Those funds and the expenses that we incur in that fund are basically to buy some supplies and to buy uniforms. We usually use that to buy uniforms. Because in reality, the amount of money that we collect from the students for fees, that goes back and reduces the operating budget. But we collect it in that account at the end of the year. We take the money and we put that in our operating budget because we budget in our operating budget a credit or a negative amount in the operating budget.
All
Okay,
said,
so-
Alderman Jenny, or?
No, I have another question, if I may. So to get a handle on the athletics, where would I see, what the cost is? And
The total cost of our athletics outside of that special revenue fund, it's probably about 800,000. About 800,000, I think 800 or 900,000. In the budget book that you have, it's not going to break out on one line for athletics. You'd find it in some of the accounts. There's some accounts for officials. There's some accounts.
Laundry.
Laundry, officials, assignment fees, things like that. But the actual, most of the cost for our athletic program is actually paying the coaches and paying the people that run the athletic director and the people that help her run the programs. But if you wanted to see, I could put it's not in the budget book you have in front of you, but it's something we typically put together. I could easily send it over to you to see what the cost per line item for athletics is.
Please send it to Donna Graham so it can be given to the entire board.
Okay.
Any other questions, Alderman Jenny?
Yes, and you mentioned, the students have to pay a fee to participate in the athletic program. Is there any kind of provision for low-income students, or are there scholarship programs? I mean, I'd hate to think that people would be denied the opportunity if their family circumstances don't allow it. Can you comment on that?
Sure, we do. Yes, if you're a free and reduced lunch student, you typically don't have to pay the fee. And even if you're not, and you had a sudden, financial issue in your family, you can reach out to the athletic director, and that person will make a decision and maybe work with you on a payment plan or reduce the amount. So we really try to, every student that really wants to play, we find a way to let them play.
Yeah, when they generated those some years ago, there were provisions in that motion to make sure that no student was not allowed to play a sport because they couldn't afford the fee.
Okay, thank you.
And while we're on the revenues, Mr. Donovan, you want to just go through the CTE? These we have students that come in from other cities and they pay a tuition for.
Yes. Yeah, so we, those students that come in, that's actually, there's sort of two pieces of revenue we get on the CTE, but yes, that goes in, to the money we get from the students. That goes to, I think we have a special revenue fund in there for that.
Yes, and the monies stay in there to replace any of the equipment that has to be replaced.
Correct.
Or at least offset the cost of any equipment that needs to be replaced, because in the high schools, we have automotive programs, we have all different types of programs. I can't remember all of them, but
Machining, do a plug for machining. That's a really important program that we brought back that provides an excellent career opportunities for our kids. So just want to point out our machining program. Along with
cosmetology, cosmetology,
culinary,
nurse
et cetera.
training, culinary, there are a lot of them. Childcare.
And the funding for that is basically three places. Operating budget has some, we have a Perkins grant, which is one of our federal grants. It's typically about $350,000 a year. That will help you start a new program or make changes to programs. It won't replace equipment. And that's what that other special revenue fund Mr. Dowd just spoke to. That's what we use to replace existing equipment. So
we also
right now, the funding for the program is in relatively good shape.
We also send students to other cities, and we pay that tuition. Like, I know in Hudson, it's farming, and I'm not sure what others there are, but.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, and just as a reminder, when somebody speaks, please state your name so the transcriber will know who's speaking. Because we can see who's speaking, but she can't. Alderman Lopez, did you have a question?
I was going to mention the culinary program as well. Also congratulate you, Alderman Dowd. You were saying you were on the board when we invented sports?
No, not invented. Yeah, so I was on the board for a long time, but not that long. Okay, so let's go through the appropriations on page, starting on 263. You just want to touch on the ones that Alderman Liu, did you have a question before we start on appropriations?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the special ed page,
Can you get closer to your microphone? It's hard to hear you.
on the special ed page, I believe it's page 340, 330. Why is the out-of-district tuition going down $100,000?
Mr. Donovan?
That's just an estimate, and because it was lower this year, the actual was lower this year due to COVID. We're just wondering, we're taking a conservative estimate that we may have fewer students coming to our programs due to the fear of COVID. Now, we're hoping that come September, things will be pretty much back to normal in all the districts. But we took a conservative approach this year.
Okay, thank you.
Over the many years, that target has been extremely hard to hit because at any time you can have a student come in that needs to go to out-of-district placement, and some of the students are exceptionally high costs per student. And that changes as students come in and out of the system, so it's extremely hard to budget that. I'm sure Mr. Donovan would agree to that. Okay, so let's go through. If you just want to touch on the ones that have had significant changes. Are you looking for your budget?
Yeah, well, I have a, so we're looking at the various, accounts. So if we, just looking at my sheet, which might be slightly different than yours, there's a big increase in the 51900, which is salary reserves. Typically, if there's a contract in place with a union, we'll just budget whatever the increase is. We have 5 contracts that we're currently negotiating that are going to hopefully be dealt with this coming school year. So that's obviously the reason that number is as high as it is. If it were a year where there were all the contracts are in place, that would be a very low number. As far as other, actually, let me go.
Which line was that, Mr. Donovan?
The 51900.
Oh, look, salary adjustments?
Yes. Let me just get this.
Was the overall 51 account went down $751,000. Salaries and wages.
It went down? No.
Well, last year you had a budget of 90 million rather, 50,921, and the mayor's proposed is 89,299, 776. That's lower.
Hold on, Well, all the labor accounts in 21 was 89,780. Oh, you know what that might be? Those amounts were added, those one-time funds. So if you take those one-time funds, the base budget for last year for all the labor accounts was really 89,780, and we're budgeting 91,173.
Mm-hmm.
So it is an increase based on the base budget, but then we had some one-time funds that were added.
That's actually the explanation that I was looking to clarify for people that have this book in front of them and they're going, what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so sort of other line items in not necessarily in particular order, but that have increased, our transportation. There's 2 lines in there for transportation. The net increase in those 2 lines is 280,000. We signed a contract with First Student, another 5-year contract. This was the first year of that contract. And we have going forward 3% increase a year for the next 4 years. So that's what that 280 is. We increased, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, our out-of-district tuition 100,000. So it was 5,694,000. Now it's 5,794,000.
Mm-hmm.
The actual amount that we project for this year will be 6.4 or 6.5 million. So as you can see, the budget in the operating budget doesn't cover the cost of all of it, but typically in a year, if there's a line item or 2 that's under budget, I use that to cover it, or I have that special revenue fund, and I budget about $400,000 to $500,000 if it overruns here, that I can cover it there. The computer equipment line item is 141,000 higher than it was last year, but last year it was artificially low because of some other funding that covered computer equipment. So this is this brings it back up to more of a typical year.
Okay.
The computer software line's up 59,000. That's a line item that's going to go up every year, simply because the cost of software goes up. If we simply just keep all the exact same software each year, we're going to have increases.
We can take a break for a second. Alderman Lou has a question.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Um, I'm new to this. Would it be possible I'm having trouble following where you are in the accounts? And if you could just identify like the two-digit category that you're referring to, because when you said transportation, I had a question about special education transportation in the other services category, but it's very hard for me to follow what you're referring to when I don't know what grouping on the 2 pages or 3 pages I should be looking at.
Yeah,
Sure,
Lauren,
let me do this.
she's referring to the 55 account, other services. Did you have a question, Alderman Lou, about why it's that high, or?
Sure, if you want, I can just ask that question, but, yeah, I don't know if we're all following along in the book, but yeah, I have a hard time knowing where we're looking. For the special education, yeah, looks like it went up $300,000, and my question was, could you just, comment on that?
Yes, and that's pretty much related to the transportation. We break into two. We have transportation costs, so sort of for regular, which are the yellow buses picking up our students and dropping them off. And then we have the special education transportation, which is a number of different ways of transporting those students. Some of it is the smaller first student buses. That's when we're transporting those students within the city. And then there's those smaller vans, which you may see. First Student owns a few of those, but we also have to reach out because some of our students travel to places like Waltham and Methuen and Billerica and other places within the state of New Hampshire. So, but there's maybe 1 or 2 students that go to those schools. So, the cost of that did increase $343,000, but if you notice the account right above it, regular transportation, that's reduced by 62 because what we did was we sort of flipped some of those buses. So the amount in this year's budget is a little more accurate than last year. The net increase in those accounts is 280,000, which is pretty much what.
All set, Alderman Lou? The budget gets all of their funds, and then they have, the Board of Education and the school department have autonomy on how to spend them. They sort of have their own way of keeping their budget, and when they give their budget to the city, then the city, Mr. Griffin, has to translate it into the budget book format, so that's why it doesn't line up sometimes perfectly. And I have Alderman Lopez waving frantically with a question.
I like to think of it as casually and charismatically. This might be a question for the speaker, or maybe a question that President Raymond could answer. But in terms of transportation for special needs, special education types of transportation, there seems like there would be overlap for medical insurance and medical transportation. Is there anything where the school might provide transportation for someone with special education needs that we may be able to get reimbursement through insurances, or use those services instead of providing them directly ourselves? I'm not sure where the line on those is.
Mr. Donovan?
Yes, we do. We are able to, through the Medicare revenue, that's one of the, in your, I think the white pages of your budget book, there's a Medicaid revenue line item, so we do get some reimbursement for specific students for that. But we do provide the service, and then you just get the reimbursement from the federal government.
Is there any optimism at maybe getting more reimbursement now that working in social work, I know that Medicaid and Medicare as programs were sort of not unveiled to people over the past 4 years. Like no one was telling them when the application phases were or whether they were eligible and all that kind of stuff. And there's already a much more dedicated campaign to say, hey, these are different healthcare reimbursement programs. These are different insurance programs. Is that something that we may be able to see some cost savings for, or that we might be able to invest in maybe spreading the word a little bit and getting more parents to utilize those?
Well, we currently use a third party to do the Medicare billing for us called MSB, and they're pretty much experts on this, so they keep us up to date. I would suggest we probably bill for everything that we can bill for. And you're correct in that sometimes we need parents' approval to do that, but I don't think that's been a big issue, getting their approval. It made the timeliness of it might be a little bit of an issue, but with that kind of billing, we can go back, I believe, up to 12 months. So we don't typically lose any.
Okay, I'm just hopeful because any money that we get that isn't generated in-house is probably money coming back to us that we've paid out, whether it's state funds or whether it's federal funds. So when there's larger institutionalized programs that we can benefit from and where more of our parents might be able to enroll in those services, I feel like that saves a little bit of our local tax economy in many ways. Plus, it's kind of the tip of the iceberg for the benefits for them. Like there's a lot of other ways that connecting with appropriate levels of Medicare or medical reimbursement and insurance might get them better service and better preventative and a better overall infrastructure so that their kids can perform better academically. So that's just my hope. I'm not sure there's any kind of modeling in place to see what that'll look like until it happens.
So several years ago, we found that we weren't getting as much Medicaid money as possible. That's when the Board of Ed, that's quite a while ago now, I guess, went out and hired this outside firm, and they get every penny they're entitled to now.
It's good. I know there are changes too in that we have, as Mr. Donovan said, that there's probably people specifically focused on this. But for example, in the past year, I've seen a lot more use of insurance-funded transportation to appointments. I've seen a lot more access for people with mobility issues that might need wheelchair vans or that kind of thing. It seems to be a rapidly growing industry, and as there's more industry behind it, then prices come down, opportunities increase. You never know when a parent needs to have somebody brought to an appointment or from an appointment or transported to or from a school. And I know we have systems set up for that in our own school district. I just wouldn't hate to see more options for parents.
Great, thank you. Any other questions on the appropriations? Alderman Jettie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I share Alderman Lou's difficulty following the presentation, trying to follow it in the book, and I hear the explanation given by Alderman Dowd about how your way of doing the budget is different than the city's way, and I don't know that we have any influence over that, but if we do, it seems that I certainly would find it. I don't know why the city changes your method of doing it for this presentation. I assume there's a reason for it, but if there isn't, or maybe we ought to get both. Your budget the way you do it, so when you talk about it, we can follow along what you're talking about, and then the city can do it its way if that's necessary. But so if I could ask some general questions.
Okay, before you ask that, the translator isn't on tonight. That's John Griffin. So more specific questions would be able to be answered by him on how things translate, but he's not on this evening.
Okay. So Mr. Donovan, during your presentation, you had a slide presentation. which I think it would be helpful. Is it possible for you to provide that to the board through Donna Graham so that we can look at those numbers that you presented?
Yes, I actually sent that to Ms. Graham a day or two ago, so she has that.
She may have already sent it to me. I apologize if that's the case.
No, that's fine.
But you mentioned the cost per student in Nashua. I think the number was less than 14,000. Do you remember?
Yes, 13,831, I believe it was last year.
And I think I saw somewhere that the state average is like 16,000. Do you know what the state average is?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's certainly higher than Nashua. But one thing you should consider is the size of Nashua in the state. You take all your costs, you divide by the number of students to come up with that. So if you have more students, you're probably going to spend a little less per student than you are in some of the very small districts. So I typically tell people, don't compare Nashua's cost per student to some small district that might have 300 kids of 800 kids in it, because their cost structure, if they're fitting 8 students on a bus, the cost per bus is going to be a lot more than the cost per bus in Nashua. But sort of, it is, I think it's more valuable to look at Manchester, to look at Concord, to look at Portsmouth, Salem, some of the larger districts. And are we lower than, I think we're higher than Manchester, probably lower than Concord and Portsmouth. So to me, you really got to get an average of the larger districts and compare that than trying to compare it to the small ones.
Okay, I guess whatever the numbers are, I guess the important question is, are we, I think you've given part of the answer as to why our average is less than the state average. I guess it's not necessarily because we're doing a better job, and it's not necessarily true that we're not spending enough money on our students. Do you have any comment about that?
Well, that's a interesting question. I have personal opinions. I think I'll leave this one to the acting superintendent, Dr. McKinney, or the board president, Ms. Raymond.
So
Ms. Raymond?
Heather Raymond here. I'll jump into this one. So have a larger percentage of special education students and high need special education students here in Nashua. Because we have the infrastructure to provide some services, we have people who actually move here for that. If you watch Andrew Walensky and Jeff Tobin's presentation about school funding, you see that Nashua is about 10th from the bottom in the whole state. And a lot of it comes down to property values and property taxes. There are some districts in the state that have very high property values, and so they can have a lower tax rate and still have a greater tax funding and be able to spend that on education. I mean, if you look at how COVID affected different districts last year, compared to Bedford already had one-to-one Chromebooks for their students. So when COVID hit and everyone had to go remote, their students were already equipped with Chromebooks to take home and work. Whereas we gave out, was it 3,600? And we still had to order another 3,300, and we still don't have a one-to-one ratio. So I do think that there is discussion to be had about per pupil spending and whether or not Nashua spends enough on our students, especially compared to other districts around the state. Having said that, I do think that Dr. McKinney and Mr. Donovan have done a remarkable job with this budget, making sure that our students have what they need and allowing for our contracts. I'm just personally concerned about the requirements of our agreement with the Department of Justice regarding ELL services. I'm excited that we're going to embark on this project with them, but I'm nervous about the resources that it's going to take over the next 3 years and how that is going to affect our budget when we know we have rising special education costs, when we know that the use of technology in the classroom is going to continue to increase. We've learned so much through COVID about the way that technology can help and the way that face-to-face can help. And so I think as we integrate that over the next few years, we may want to take a look at our per pupil spending and how that is being applied to ensure that we have equity across the district, but that we also are providing equity compared to other districts in the state. So that's my soapbox. And I'll step down off of it now.
Alderman Jettie, you have a follow-up?
I do. So you mentioned the ELL settlement. That was another question I had. I think that settlement came about after you settled on this budget. So was that taken into account? And if not, how will it be taken into account?
So Heather Raymond here again. Yes, it was after, but I like to think of it as a partnership because we worked with them and we've made an agreement on how we're going to move forward for everybody. So I don't think a settlement makes me think of punishments. We're not being punished. We're working together to make it a more welcoming and an equitable place for our students who speak other languages. So, Dr. McKinney?
If I could follow up again. My question really was, I don't know what the details of the settlement are, but I'm assuming it's going to require us to spend more money. And since that was done after you settled on this budget, how are you going to pay for whatever increase in funding it's going to cost to abide by the settlement?
I think Mr. McKinney wants to address that. Garth?
Sure, thank you. So the agreement really focuses on 7 things. The services we provide to kids, having more certified ELL teachers, not just specialized teachers, but classroom teachers that have that dual certification as well. Their access to the core content, training our principals, improving our curriculum for EL kids, communicating to EL families, and evaluating our EL program. So with those 7 things, we have to have a response, and we're drafting a response to send back to the DOJ in terms of our next steps. Fortunately, a lot of these could be or are eligible for ESSER funds in CARES Act. But the process is we have to apply, get approvals from the state, and use them. So we're fortunate in the timing. Mr. Chopra, Student Services Director, has been in contact with a number of agencies. A higher ed institution like Southern New Hampshire University is going to do a lot of the training for us. So I think this first year, we're going to be putting a lot of things in place, and then we'll get feedback about how it's going, and then we'll improve it going forward. So I think we're kind of fortunate right now to have some extra funding available to us, but it's going to be jumping through those layers of approval to make sure they work. Fortunately, Mr. Donovan and his team are very good with the grants, and we have folks that are pretty good at writing the narratives to get them approved at the state level. Hope that's helpful.
All said, Alderman Jettie, or do you have a follow-up?
I do have another question. You know, since our, since we have no control over the line items, we control only the bottom line. So I see that, I think, what I see in the budget book shows me, I believe, an increase of 5 million over last year's budget. So I don't know if you, President Raymond, can give us a general overview as to why why you need to increase the budget by $5 million.
Well, I think Mr. Donovan can answer that with more clarity than I can. But one of the things that's different between what Mr. Donovan works on and what the Board of Ed approves and what you have in front of you is that ours does not include, what we work on and what we approve doesn't include benefits. And so I don't know how much of that 5 million is benefits, how much is from other things off the top of my head. Mr. Donovan?
Yes, about 2 million of that is non-benefit. So the other 3 million, most of that 3 million is the pension cost, the increase in the pension that's been passed down from the state. They changed their rate of return at the state in their calculations, so therefore that required an increase in the costs to the cities and towns. So basically, the increase in the budget is 5 million, but 2 million came from salaries and increases in the school. The other 3 came from benefits, most of which this year is the pension.
All set, Alderman Jenny?
Yes, thank you.
Just 2 quick things. One, I just have to explain that the reason I'm more familiar with the translation between the Board of Ed budget and the city's budget is I was on the Board of Ed for 10 years, and many of those years I was chairman of the budget. And the other year I was the president of the board. So very familiar with how they translate, and I've had many sessions with John Griffin on that translation. The other thing is, if anyone wants to go on the school department website, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume they have all of the budget deliberations that you went through on the website, and it can give you a lot more insight into the specific areas of their budget. And again, Alderman Jettie was correct. In the end, we have just bottom line authority on the total amount of money. We can ask questions on the various pieces of it, but how the money actually gets spent is up to the Board of Education and the school department. Mr. Lopez, Alderman Lopez, I see you're waving frantically again.
With a quiet dignity, yes. This is a while ago, I think we were talking about how the school expenses for special education in a bigger city may look different than that in a smaller city. And I would want to comment that as a larger city, we also, because we don't have anywhere else to turn to, we also invest a little bit more in infrastructure. And so the quality of the product that we have, we are answerable to. I would say at the Board of Aldermen, as long as I've been on it, 3 terms now, I guess, we have had a cap in mind for how much our budget is going to be always. Whether it was the legal spending cap or whether it was the, okay, well, the courts just said that spending cap is non-enforceable, but we're not going to just like ignore the spending cap. So there've always been efforts to keep the overall tax burden on citizens as a priority, to avoid sticker shock, to avoid any major changes in value. We've had escrow funds and over funds that were unspent that we've applied to the tax rate to pay it down, that we really never thought to offer to the school district. So the school district and the school board have never operated from what do kids need and how much will that cost. They've operated from what is the Board of Aldermen going to give them and what can they do with that. And there have been years where they've asked for more money and we've not done that. There have been years where there have been efforts to privatize sections of the school activities. There have been a lot of different changes, but I think the overall result isn't really as one that we as aldermen or as the city at large should be extremely proud of. I think at best we should be satisfied with it. But this is not a reflection on the professionals in the school district or even the Board of Education, which has really, at least under President Raymond's oversight, really tackled these issues and tried to advocate for students and focus on the needs of the community versus the needs of the students versus the strict sticker cost on it. I recognize that the Board of Education has been as fiscally responsible as they can be with what they have. And I recognize that it's the Board of Aldermen's role to manage priorities other than just the Board of Education and the school district's costs. But I think as a person with a disability, and probably most parents of kids struggling with disabilities, whether they're learning disabilities, whether they're physical disabilities, or even whether they're mental health challenges, we could do better. And that's always going to be the sentiment, because there's more that we can do. Smaller communities may have different tax structures, and I mean, Bedford, for example, may be able to do more without impacting its citizens the same way that ours do. And when we look at that impact, we have to also weigh, are we talking about raising taxes on fixed income seniors who may struggle to pay their mortgages? Or is this going to be the thing that bumps a working class family into the red zone versus, sustainability? So those are some of the things you get in a bigger city, where smaller towns and other types of communities wouldn't have the kind of diversity of need or the diversity of priorities that we have to manage here. So I think we definitely could put much more into the education department, and we could offer much more advanced and updated infrastructures for helping people with special education needs. We can reevaluate efficiencies based on economies of scale. And that is something we're in the middle of doing. Chairman Dowd is in the process of overseeing the redevelopment of our middle school alignment in order to address those needs, to provide better spaces for special education programs, while also more evenly distributing students around the city. So there's a lot of work that we can do. The Board of Education does a lot of management of what we are able to give them as aldermen. But at the end of the day, I think when you ask the question, does Nashua do a great job with its special educations? You can really only answer that, does Nashua do a great job with what it is given versus with what it could be doing compared to other places. Other places have different tools, different resources, and a lot of different advantages we don't have.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Lopez. Just one other thing. Cities in the state of New Hampshire get to evaluate their spending on schools through their Board of Aldermen or the reps. But towns have a special warrant for education. They address their education separately. But just one thing that might help explain the difference in spending. Mr. Donovan, without getting into specifics, what's the most expensive out-of-district placement that you've seen here in Nashua? And if you let us know that amount of money, you would see that if there's a town like Greenville or Warren or some of the other towns in New Hampshire, they would have to also supply that education, and that would be a huge impact on their budgets compared to the city of Nashua. So, Mr. Dunn, what's the most expensive one you've ever seen?
We have one student that we pay annually about $280,000 a year.
So you can see that the towns that have a much smaller budget, if they had to address that, and they would by federal law, that would be huge hit to their budget. Okay, any other questions? Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Donovan, in your 54 series count property services, I see in rentals a significant drop from 253 to 73,000. Is that, when you say rentals, I'm probably assuming, or I'm thinking, is that the portable classroom? And would I be correct in determining that?
You would not be correct, but
Good.
you left that open for me, Alderman.
No, that's quite all right. I was hoping that, Mr. Donovan, that it was. I know we've done hard work to get away from those portable classrooms and, you know, I just
Now
wonder
that-
if this
what
is our,
that-
part of our reward.
No, that reduction is, the reduction, that's the amount we pay for the Brentwood lease out on Amherst Street. So
Oh,
now
okay.
that we've made the purchase of the Franklin Street building, we'll no longer have a rental, so that's the $160,000 savings. Now, since you brought that up, there's an account 81100, which went from 0 to 250,000. The 250,000 is the payment for this coming school year towards the Franklin Street facility. So the net increase in the budget is a $90,000 increase in the budget for Franklin Street. But we also have a savings of about $50,000. It's in the Title I grant, but we're moving the students from the First Church up at the top of Main Street. Those students are being moved out of the church, so we won't pay that rent anymore. And they'll be moved over to the Broad Street School.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Donovan. It's, that makes me equally as happy as getting rid of the portable classroom, so thank you. But I do have another question, if I may.
Sure.
In the 61 supplies and material accounts, I see there was about a halving in books, and I also see a significant reduction from 126 to 56,000 in testing materials. Would I be letting the cat out of the bag that cut in testing materials, that we're not gonna do tests for the students? And I hope I'm not letting the cat out of the bag with them.
No, I don't think you're doing that at all.
Would that be
one of the
COVID
other-
related, because the books aren't as tired?
No, if you look at there's another account in that group, 61,830 subscriptions. You'll see that there's an increase there.
Yes, in their
So-
subscriptions, yeah.
Yes, so sort of the part of the difference between the books decrease and the subscription increase is instead of buying textbooks, a lot of our programs now use online materials. So you pay a subscription fee as opposed to purchase books. So that's part of what that is. The testing material line itself is 70,000. We changed the company that was doing our testing. I think Dr. McKinney can speak more to that.
Okay. Well, no, I'm satisfied. I'm glad to see that we're looking to get modernization, particularly with the books. As you know, they do get tired and get used quite heavily. And if we're going to something online, maybe we're getting a better bang for the buck, you know, in that type of situation. Thank you, Mr. Donovan.
I know that people in my age category still like that, hold a book and read it, although I do spend a lot of time on a computer.
Or the newspaper.
Yeah, but everything's going digital. We, years ago, the military shifted from hard copies of technical manuals to digital and saved billions of dollars and weight, especially on ships and more particularly on submarines, because a laptop weighs a lot less than numbers and numbers of books or technical manuals and drawings. So that's one thing that's changing. Are there any other questions, Alderman Liu?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions on line items, but maybe by just asking a general question, I'll have them all answered. How does so a lot of the CARES funds were able to pay for some of the expenses in the school department last year. So when I look at actual through, when I look at what actually got spent, that figure, has that figure already had the credit applied to it? You know, if the funds did not have to come from the school department as predicted, say like cleaning supplies, they were all COVID related this year, um, then is that figure, I'm having a hard time articulating it. I guess I'm trying to understand. It looks like most of the categories we spent less than we expected last year. Is that because CARES funding was able to pay for some of it?
Somewhat, but it's the line items when you're looking through the period. The budget book says through a certain point in time. The spending for this school year will be well below what the budget for this school year was. It's not, most of it is not because we used CARES funds / federal funds instead of local funds. It was because we simply didn't incur those expenses this year. For example, we probably had 40 or so paras that didn't come back, and we didn't hire them. We didn't need them in a remote learning. So we saved that number. We reduced the amount of overtime needed in the school district, most of which is plant operations custodians. There was no requirement for that because we weren't in the schools most of the year. All our utility fees are lower this year because people weren't in the schools. So what we used the federal funds for was to buy, let's say, masks and cleaning supplies and things that we typically don't buy. So it was in addition to. And where we've spent a lot of them in the beginning was on technology. So the good thing about that is we've been able to significantly improve our wireless. We've got a lot more devices. We've got new switches. Probably by the end of this summer, we'll have pretty much redone our whole technology infrastructure. So that's what most of the federal money was used for.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have a couple of line item questions.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
But so for instance, computer equipment, 71,221, I see the available budget is different than the original budget. Was that because CARES funds were added to the available budget?
That was not actually CARES funds, because CARES funds has to be kept separate.
Okay.
That was, if you recall, last year, there were some one-time funds, which were funds we received from the state, and the school district was given about $1 million of that, and we used some of that for our computer infrastructure.
Okay.
That's why the difference.
Thank you. Could I just follow up on?
Sure.
Thank you. Under supplies and materials, education supplies went up 20%. Was that COVID related?
The 61135?
Yeah. Yes.
Most of that line item is budgeted by the individual schools. So the way we budget for the individual schools is we give each school a certain dollar amount. They then take that dollar amount and they budget it to the different accounts they think they're going to use. So we did not increase, I think slightly, but we really didn't put much of an increase in the amount of money we're giving to the schools next year compared to what we gave them this year. They simply budgeted more of it in supplies and less of it in other line items like equipment or computers or things like that. Okay. So that's really what that increase, it's not necessarily an increase school-wide, it's just an increase in that account from the schools themselves.
Thank you. And just
Said
one,
Alderman Lou?
just one other question, if I could.
Well, go ahead.
Under longevity, I'm just curious about this. The original budget last year was 385,000. How could that, just how could longevity be more than you expected? Is it because of overtime?
No, longevity is in, I think all our contracts have a longevity. If an employee stays with the union, excuse me, for 15 or 20 or 25 years, whatever, depending on, they get paid a certain amount of money for being in the district. So it's sort of a longevity bonus. If you stay with the district, you get this amount once a year. There were two things that happened. The 385 was a bad budget job by me last year.
Okay.
That's really what that was. And part of the reason that it was as bad as 185 was that the paras used to get their longevity each paycheck. So we didn't budget it in the longevity line. It got budgeted in the full wage at the salaries full time. We changed that in their latest contract, so now they're getting paid a lump sum like all the other unions. So it basically moved from wages full-time down to longevity. So it's probably an increase of about 15 or 20,000. It's really not that full number.
Thank you. I'm all set.
All set?
Hear me.
Yeah, one other thing, just for information. At the end of the school year, after Mr. Donovan has paid all the FY '21 expenses, the monies that are left, go back to the city, to the general fund. So, and they're used for various things, one of which is offsetting the tax rate for the coming year. It's very difficult to manage a budget, right down to the dollar, because they can't overspend. And Mr. Donovan does a great job of keeping that a reasonable balance available to cover the unknown unknowns. And at the end of the year, usually has funds left over. But it's very tricky managing $155 million budget last year and 161 million proposed for 22. So kudos to Mr. Donovan for managing that amount of money and making sure that it's not overspent. Okay, any other questions? Seeing none. Is there anything else that you want to address relative to the budget, Mr. Donovan?
No, I just looking forward to this upcoming school year. As you saw, we have a significant amount of the CARES funds. So I think with those funds available, we'll be able to take care of learning loss and a lot of the issues caused by the pandemic. And with the amount of monies we have, we also should be able to do some repairs to HVAC systems in our schools. So in case there's variance or something else comes up, we should be able to make improvements. So it will be very different next year, and that we'll have a lot of money. Some of it's very specific what to spend it on, but since I've been here up until this year, was always very, very tight. This year, because of the pandemic, there's extra money in the budget, which you'll find out later in the summer. But I think with all the CARES Act, we should be able to meet most of our actual needs.
So I'm glad you mentioned the HIVAC. Mr. Smith and I have been looking at that across the schools. The one thing that they've identified nationwide is that air quality is a very important factor when you're talking about a pandemic. And some of our schools have new HIVAC systems in them because we've modified several schools over the last 10 years. But we still have schools that need significant HIVAC work. And we do have a couple of things in mind, which I'm sure Mr. Smith has talked to you about, Mr. Donovan. So
Yes.
when that funding is available, we'll be looking to improve the air quality in the schools, not just for the pandemic, but also there has been significant things in the paper lately and other magazines about air quality helping students learn. So it's a very important factor. One other quick question on debt service on line 73, capital lease, just so that people understand what that's for.
Oh, the 75120, that one?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's our copiers. If we're trying to move more and more to technology, but teachers still love paper. And the worst thing you can do to a teacher is to have the copy machine break down in the school. It's the worst thing in the world. So we, a few years ago, did one lease with the company, and now we have another one. So over 6 years, we will have all new copy machines. Half of them were put in a year ago, and the other half will be put in on year 3 of the 6-year lease.
Okay.
But we're able to, my goal was to keep it around $100,000 a year of the cost to the district. And we've been able to do that for about 8 years now. So
Okay.
for $100,000 a year, every teacher's happy most of the time.
The other question I have is on line 90500, expense transferred to other funds.
Yes. What that is, that's two items. The facility rentals, we rent out our facilities and we collect fees for that. Those fees go in to reduce our operating budget. In this current year, our budget was $140,000. Because of COVID, we didn't rent our facilities, so we ended up with zero. I was a little more conservative going into next year, so we only budget $100,000 in revenue. And we plan on, based on the way things are going, releasing the facilities out again come September. So hopefully we can receive that amount. The other piece of it, I spoke to earlier when Alderman Jetty asked about the athletic fees. That's where the athletic fees go. So that's where the net reduction. So the amounts we receive in athletic fees and the amount of facility rentals show up in the operating budget as negatives or revenue, a different way of looking at it. Okay. So we not only did the athletic director request a decrease of about $20,000 in the fees because we just haven't been receiving the fees as budgeted. So we're budgeting it based on what we had received in 2019.
And the other question I have is, did the mayor specify where he thought that $119,300 was coming from? It's sort of not a...
He didn't give a specific line item, but my opinion, we can live with it.
Okay. If there are no other questions, I want to thank the school district and President Raymond for coming before us this evening and going over the school budget. I know that you spent countless hours in meetings hashing this out, many late nights, I'm sure, as it always has been. So thank you very much. And I just want to make one other announcement here is this is the last Zoom meeting for budget and other Board of Aldermen meetings. The the governor has not extended his order, so all meetings henceforth will be in person. So the next budget meeting, we will need a quorum of budget people here in the chamber. All right?
Alderman Dow?
Yes, President Wilshire?
There might be a little hiccup.
A little hiccup?
Well, pre-COVID, members of the board were able to call in and be on the phone. We discovered today or yesterday that since the renovation, we don't have a phone line. So we're working on it.
Well,
You can
I
call
asked
into
Attorney
Zoom.
Bolt. I asked Attorney Bolton that very question. He said that Zoom could qualify for phone-in. So the planning boards and the zoning boards are still doing the hybrid. They're still allowing their people that want to comment and everything coming in on Zoom, not having to attend in person, but that's the audience. We still need a quorum of board members here in chamber. Did somebody want to add anything?
Alderman Lopez?
Alderman Lopez, waving in the flowers.
Yes, I want to make sure there is some kind of remote thing since life has recently thrown me under the bus.
Literally.
Literally. All right. If there's nothing else, Alderman O'Brien, do we have a motion?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion to table R-21-142 by roll call.
Okay, the motion is to table R-21-142 until the next budget meeting. Would you call the roll?
Thank you. Alderman Schmidt,
Yes.
Alderman Jettie,
Yes.
Alderman Wiltshire,
Yes.
Alderman O'Brien votes yes, Alderman Dowd.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that's 5 yeas, 0 nays.
Okay, the budget is back on the table. Thank you, everyone. General discussion? Anyone from the committee? No?
Well, I could say something. It could be remarks from the alderman. But Mr. Chairman, where you wore two hats, and just to help out, there seems a couple members of the board were confused. Their interpretation of the way that the school board does their budget, and then compared to our current 2022, the book that we're dealing on. Would it be easy to give the school board, particularly Mr. Donovan and Ms. Raymond, the copy of that book, so they can refer?
They do get a copy.
They do get a copy, so they can transpose it?
Yeah, and I'm sure that Mr. Donovan's been involved with Mr. Griffin over the years, that the translation, sometimes they don't line up line for line.
Right.
And Mr. Griffin puts the pages together, and it's so that they can have everything in the same format. And since our only latitude is to do something at the bottom line, it's not critical that it be identical. But again, if you go into the Board of Education's website, you will see far more detail on the areas that you might be interested in. I'm sure far more detail. The budget book in my past years has always been about 6 inches thick. I'm hoping most of it's digital now, but there were numerous presentations, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just trying to help out if it was a matter of issuing a book. Maybe we could remember
no.
next year.
They get a book,
All right, very good. Thank you.
yeah. Public comment? Is there anyone from the public that wishes to comment?
I think Mr. Donovan is trying to comment.
Mr. Donovan?
Yeah, just news coming. The school district put together, we have a new budget software now. So we just put it in this spring. We did it the same as we did our budget. So now we got the new system to agree to the old system. And the hope is that you, the alderman, will be getting that budget put in next year. So then we will have one online system with a lot more information and data at your hands. So it was a lot of work, but I think in the long run, it'll be well worth it.
Okay, very good. Just FYI, back in the day, when I first joined the Board of Ed, the superintendent used to put together a budget asking for everything under the kitchen sink, anything you could think of. And we started with a much higher number, trying to boil it down to an acceptable number, so it's a little different now. Okay, no public comment. Remarks by Alderman? Seeing no one. Non-public, we do not need a non-public. Alderman O'Brien,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion to adjourn by roll call.
please call the roll.
Alderman Schmidt,
Yes.
Alderman Jettie,
Yes.
Alderman Wilshire,
Yes.
Alderman O'Brien votes yes. Alderman Dowd.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, 5 yeas, 0 nays.
And, okay, the motion carries, and we're adjourned at 8:41 PM.